Anxiety is something that affects a lot of tennis players. It's something that I dealt with myself a lot when I was younger. It affected me both in terms of my on-court performance, but also my general well-being as well. And it's something a lot of players deal with, especially a lot of juniors. So what I want to do in this video is talk about some of the things that I had to do myself to overcome my issues with anxiety and anxiety on court, and talk a little bit about the science behind the scenes about how anxiety functions in different parts of the brain and some strategies that might be beneficial for other people. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not trying to claim to be a doctor. What we're doing is talking about science and research that's available and strategies that I've kind of used in the past on myself and with other people that I've worked with. So hopefully it'll be beneficial to you. If it is, really appreciate it if you could give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel before, it's much appreciated if you could do that as well. So I want to start by talking a little bit about what anxiety is and means within the context of our brain and how our brains function, because ultimately our brains control everything that we do. And they're basically hardwired for survival. I think tennis is the most important thing in the world. You might do as well. But all our brains really care about is not dying in the next 10 seconds. And that's kind of the way that we evolved. So the way systems are set up, it's to prevent those things. And anxiety is basically a protective mechanism, a protective emotion. It's about thinking about things that could potentially harm us in the future so that then we could avoid those things that harm us. And obviously in the past that was thinking about, maybe is there a lion around the corner? I don't want to walk around the corner because I don't want to get eaten by the lion. Obviously we don't deal with that type of thing anymore, but the way our systems function remains the same as they used to. So we get these anxious feelings in response to threat or danger or perceived threat or danger. It doesn't have to be an actual threat, it's just kind of what we think might be dangerous. So that's kind of how you want to think about anxiety. It's a protective mechanism. And then when we dive deeper into it, there can be a lot of different things that our brain might want to protect us from. Now, one of them is the fear of losing. We all want to go out on court, we want to play our best, we want to win. We don't want to lose because it can be embarrassing. You could worry about what your friends and your family might think. If you're a professional player, you could obviously, there's consequences in terms of prize money and providing yourself and your family for a living. So there's this perceived threat of danger, and that in itself can kind of lend itself to anxiety. But what's really important is we should be able to control it. It's just a tennis match. It isn't a life or death situation. And what makes us human and kind of gives us an advantage in the world is our frontal lobe. This is kind of our executive control center that's responsible for kind of thinking through things and being logical. And it has the power to inhibit stuff that isn't important. So consciously we should be able to go, okay, this is a tennis match, it isn't life or death, obviously I want to win, but I need to focus on my tactics and following the game plan that I'm meant to be following. I don't need to worry about the fear of losing because that's going to increase the likelihood that I lose. So consciously I should be able to stop thinking about that and to focus on what I need to be doing. That's what should happen. But if there are lots of different threats that are going on, it can make things a little bit difficult. And that's the situation that a lot of people find themselves in. So the way that you want to think about this is as if you have a capacity to handle threat. So think of yourself or your body as a threat bucket. There are different types of threat that go into the threat bucket, and you can handle it, you can handle it, you can handle it, you can handle it. But when you get to the top and it overflows, that's when you start to experience anxiety, because now your body is in full state threat mode. Now think of tennis as the kind of the last little few drops that go into the threat bucket. If your system, your bucket is already full, that's when a tennis match can start to tip you over the edge and you start to have problems with anxiety. Well, in terms of that, you can't necessarily change the tennis match because there is always going to be an emotional component to it, because deep down we all want to win that match. What you need to do to address kind of anxiety on court is look at the other things that are filling up the threat bucket. And this was something that was going on with me in the past, and this is something that goes on with a lot of other players. So we've got to look at different things that are filling the threat bucket up, because by reducing those different types of threats, it's going to give you much more bandwidth for being able to, stay calm when you're on court and kind of focus on the process and the things that you're meant to be doing. So what this comes down to are how different areas of the brain are functioning, what different things are going on underneath that might be raising the threat level. So one of the first things that raises threat for a lot of people and that most people need to address is something called sensory mismatch. So a mismatch between the information from our eyes and from our balance system in our inner ear. These are our two most dominant systems. Obviously, we navigate the world using visual information, people understand that, but our balance system in the inner ear is responsible for kind of making sure that we're upright and kind of dealing with gravity. And they're in constant communication with each other. So when I turn my head, there's a reflex that keeps my eyes looking at things, and there's this communication between the two systems that allow me to navigate through the world safely. And when you look at the research, so you can go on PubMed, you can go on Google Scholar, and if you research sensory mismatch and anxiety, you'll come up with a lot of different studies, because when either the visual system isn't doing what it should be doing, but more often when the vestibular system isn't doing what it should be doing and the communication between them is off, that in itself is extremely threatening, because now you're getting two conflicting messages from really important systems within the brain, and your body starts to worry about that. You know, consciously you won't perceive this, but on a subconscious level, your brain is going, oh no, I'm seeing one thing, but my balance system's saying another thing. This is terrifying. What can I do? What can I do? And it really fills up the threat bucket. So one of the things that I had to do, because I had a very large concussion history, too many blows to the head when I was younger, I had some pretty significant problems with both my vestibular system and my visual system. But I had to do various different training exercises to improve how my vestibular system functions and how my visual system is functioning. That has enabled me to track the ball much more effectively and has improved my skill level, so it's helped in that sense. But one of the most important things that it did for me was helped me to address a lot of the things that I was doing in terms of anxiety. So I've got various different videos on my page or on my channel that kind of talk a little bit more about how to train the visual system and how to train the vestibular system. But if you would like to learn how to do this in more detail, I have a full coaching program where I help players with this type of thing. I'll place a link to a class that's going to explain more about it up there, and I'll place a link to the class down in the description as well, so that you can watch that and we can chat if you're potentially interested in working together. The next thing I tend to think about when it comes to anxiety is a part of the brain called the insular cortex. So we've got different parts of the brain that all have different functions, but when you look at the research on the insular cortex, it's linked to anxiety type behavior. So again, you can go on PubMed or Google Scholar and do a search for insular cortex or insular lobe and anxiety, and you'll see a number of different studies come up. So I tend to think about anxiety as maybe the insular cortex isn't doing quite what we want it to, and that's again how I kind of viewed my own body, and I had to kind of work at things from that perspective to address my own issues. But when we look at the insular cortex, it performs a number of different functions. So the way that we train it is by work on the various different things that the insular cortex does to try and improve its capacity and how it functions. So one of the things that the insular cortex does is it's responsible for the vestibular system. So the system that I've just talked about, the balance system that lives in the inner ear, kind of the map of the vestibular system lives in this insular cortex. So doing lots of vestibular training is really important for training the insular cortex as well. And again, this is all stuff that you can kind of Google Scholar, and there's plenty of research on how it functions. So, you know, looking at things and turning your head to train the vestibular ocular reflex and different things like that can help to train the vestibular system. So that's going to be one thing that you can do. This part of the brain is also responsible, or it also responds well to meditation and to mindfulness. So practicing mindfulness on a daily basis or meditating on a daily basis can be a really effective thing to do to try and train this over the long term. It's also going to be heavily involved in breathing and our brain's mapping and understanding of how we breathe. So doing lots of different breathing practices. So it might be something like box breathing, where you're practicing, you inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath after the exhale for 4 seconds. Or you could be doing alternate nostril breathing. You could be doing a Wim Hof style breathing. You could do pretty much any conscious style of breathing. It's all going to have an impact on this insular cortex. Another couple of things that you can do to impact the insular cortex are going to be cold exposure and heat exposure. So taking regular saunas is going to have a big impact on this part of the brain, and doing things like regular cold showers or cold exposures in different ways, that can also have an impact on this part of the brain. But the key thing is, when you're doing that, you have to try and control your emotions. So if you're in the sauna, you want to try and stay calm while you're in the sauna. So you don't want to sit there and go, oh, it's hot, oh, I need to get out, I need to get out. You know, set yourself a timer, whether it's 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and go, right, I'm going to be in the sauna for this long, providing you're safe to do so. And then you just stay calm. You go, okay, no, it's getting hot, I'm okay with that. And the same thing when you're in the cold exposure. Maybe you're taking a cold bath or you're in a cold shower. You don't want to be in the cold shower going, ah! You want to control your emotions and just breathe through it and go, it's cold, I'm okay. So you're basically using those formats to train your insular cortex to be able to control your emotions more effectively. And by going through that process, it trains this part of the brain. So they're the most simple different things that you can do to kind of train the insular cortex. So if we step away from direct training for the brain a moment and talk about some other things that people might need to work on to help manage anxiety, and blood sugar is going to be right at the top of the list. A lot of people have problems managing blood sugar. Now, our blood sugar needs to be kept within a very specific range so that we can supply our brain, so we can supply our muscles and different cells with the fuel it needs. If it goes too high, it becomes very toxic. If it goes too low, it becomes very toxic. When it goes too high, we release insulin to store sugar within cells. When it goes too low, we start by releasing stress hormone to free up sugar. And that's what creates the problem for a lot of people. They get times where blood sugar goes too low, and because it goes too low, they release stress hormone, and that's what kind of triggers an anxiety type response. So this can happen all day, every day in life for people, but it can also happen in tennis. You're playing tennis, you're burning through sugar stores within the brain, blood sugar goes too low, you're not able to regulate things properly, and it creates a lot of anxiety around that. And more these days, people are having problems managing blood sugar. That's why so many people have got type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. It's all about your ability to manage the sugar levels. So you would think, because you don't want the sugar to drop too low, that the solution is you just eat sugar all day, every day. But that's not generally the way it works. You tend to have to go the other way. Most people eat more carbohydrates and sugar than their body can handle. It's about kind of finding what works for each individual person. But the general strategy to balancing blood sugar levels is to have more balanced meals. So you have protein, you have fat, you have fiber, and then you have a much smaller amount of carbohydrates than most people have. Now, there's variability within that, but protein is always the most important. Our bodies need it, we function on it, all our cells and things are built from it, we have to use it for repair. Fat, again, all of our cells are wrapped in fat. We need them, it's part of our human physiology. Fiber, some people can handle fiber. If you've got a lot of digestive problems like I used to have, I don't do well on fiber, so I basically don't have any fiber in my diet, but some people can handle it. But those three things is the priority, and then the carbohydrates on top of that. But eating meals like that tends to balance blood sugar levels for people. Now, initially, you might have to do that fairly regularly, so it might have to be every 3 hours, but eventually you should be able to train yourself away from that and spread out the distance between meals. But that is a process that you have to work to by allowing your system to recover. Now, indications that maybe blood sugar management is an issue for you: if when you skip meals you get irritable and lightheaded, if you get dizzy, if you get anything like that when you're skipping meals, that's a strong indication that your blood sugar levels are dropping too low. Another strong indication is if you go to the bathroom a lot in the night. You basically wake up a lot of the night, especially if you're waking up 1, 2, 3 hours after you've gone to bed. What that normally means is blood sugar drops, you release stress hormone to help free up blood sugar, and that's what wakes people up. And they think that it's because they need the bathroom, but really it's because their stress hormone is being jacked up. So that's a good sign that it's happening, and eating balanced meals before bed is often the solution to helping address that problem. But blood sugar is absolutely crucial, or blood sugar management crucial, for preventing anxiety type symptoms on court. And then the final thing that I want to talk about in this video is the effect of inflammation. Inflammation is something that our immune system uses and does to help protect us. So it's a really important part of life. We get exposed to a virus, we need our immune system to do its job to protect us. Inflammation's involved in that. If we have an injury, we need inflammation to come along and clean away damaged cells. So inflammation is really important, but when inflammation becomes chronic and unchecked, that's when it creates a lot of difficulties, because as inflammatory chemicals travel around the body, they basically prevent stuff from working properly. So if it gets into the muscle cells or it gets into the brain, it can prevent whatever cells that are involved from producing energy effectively, and when cells don't produce energy effectively, they don't function properly. And obviously what we talked about a little bit earlier on in the video was there's a number of different parts of the brain that are going to be really important and are kind of linked within the research to anxiety. Well, if those parts of the brain just aren't doing well because of inflammation, because they're not able to produce enough energy because of inflammation, or also because maybe the blood sugar management issues are going on because you're not controlling the blood sugar, so we're not getting the right amount of sugar into the cells, the combination of inflammation and blood sugar affecting the way your brain cells produce energy means that the brain areas that we were talking about earlier aren't functioning in the way that they should, which leads to the problems that we've talked about. So the mechanism's a little bit different. Rather than straight up, it's because we need to improve the function in these parts of the brain, it's now because we're not getting the fuel supply that we need to the brain. They're still not doing what they should. So the solution there is there can be a lot of different underlying factors for inflammation, but the easiest one under our control is obviously don't smoke and do things like that. That's kind of a given. But then beyond that, controlling the type of foods that you eat, avoiding inflammatory foods. Now, the most obvious inflammatory foods are going to be kind of processed junk foods. You don't want to eat trans fats, you don't want to eat junk food, you don't want to eat candy and stuff like that. It just creates inflammation. People respond in different ways. Some people can handle quite a lot of that without any problems. Other people really can't handle very much at all. But beyond straight up eating junk food, we want to avoid kind of processed modern oils. So the vegetable oils, they tend to drive up inflammation. Next on the list, we're going to have gluten. That's a problem for a lot of people. Dairy can be a problem for a lot of people. And then beyond that, there's various different types of food like solanine, which is found in the nightshade family. So potatoes, tomatoes, bell peppers. Some people can have problems with different lectins, which are found in certain types of grain. So there can be a number of different things that could be driving inflammation in someone. It's a very individual process. The easy one is obviously removing processed foods. The next one I would go to is gluten and then dairy, and then beyond that it gets a little bit more complicated, but often removing gluten and dairy for people makes a massive difference. And if you want more information on that, a great resource for that is actually Djokovic's book, because he talked about it a lot. It's one of the things that he had to do, but it can be a really kind of game-changing thing to happen. Now, what I want you to understand with all of this is that these aren't necessarily magic fixes. Managing blood sugar and avoiding inflammatory foods can work very quickly. So they can help to deal with problems much more quickly than brain-based training. Brain-based training is training. You don't do one VOR or one breathing exercise and suddenly everything's perfect. Just like when you're trying to get fitter, you have to do it continually to improve your fitness. If you want to improve your strength, you have to continually lift weights to do that. When we're training different parts of the brain, especially in the context of what we're talking about here, you have to do it on an ongoing basis. It took me, I would say, about 2 years of consistent brain training to completely eliminate my kind of negative emotions and anxiety and that type of things. It was a gradual process of me building it up, but by training these parts of the brain over and over again, I got them to a point where I was completely fine after that. So these are just kind of some of the things that you can work on. We've had to go a little bit deep and talk about things that maybe you're not used to hearing about in tennis videos, but I think this is really important for people to learn about and to know about, because there is stuff that you can do. It's all about kind of looking at the body, what isn't functioning properly, what can you do to train it and improve it. So hopefully this has been helpful to you and given you an idea of some strategies that you can start to incorporate. Obviously, if you'd like more help with this stuff, this is kind of what I help tennis players with. I've got a whole program where I teach players about it. So I'll place a link to the class down below, and I'll also just place a link to an application so you can just book a call to chat to me if you would like to explore this stuff further. Okay, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Sorry it's been so long, but I think it's a really important topic. So hopefully you enjoyed it and found it useful. If you did, give me a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, much appreciated if you could do that. And I will catch you next time.